Yes, we'll go ahead and get this started. Once again, welcome to the Cornell Political Union. My name is Fernando. Thank you so much for coming out. Really great turnouts. We're very, very excited about our guest speaker today. Just going to give a little rundown of the format. So first, our guest speaker, Professor Katzenstein, will be coming up and presenting his talk, which will be about 20 minutes. And then after that, we'll open it up for a brief question and answer period. And then what we really love doing here in the Cornell Political Union is having a discussion debate led by the students. So we're going to open it up for the rest of the meeting to that, and then we'll conclude with a vote on whether or not the student body accepts or rejects the position of Professor Katzenstein. Any questions about that? No? Okay. So, first off, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, PAD, Pre-Law Fraternity, Roosevelt Institute, ILR Global Affairs Club, Cornell Speech and Debate Society, and Society for Women in Politics. And today, we are introducing a very special guest speaker, Peter Katzenstein. He is the Walter S. Carpenter Junior Professor of Government and International Studies here. He has degrees from Swarthmore College, the London School of Economics, and Harvard University. Professor Katzenstein work addresses issues of political economy, security, and culture and world politics. And he's previously served as the president of the American Political Science Association, and in 2013 he was recognized by the Journal of Foreign Affairs as one of the most renowned scholars of international relations. And today he has joined us to discuss the 2016 election. Today our topic is critical realignment and foreign policy in the 2016 election, ongoing or beginning. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Professor Katzenstein.
Thanks for coming out. You're well equipped. So I understand that my role is to kick off the debate, so it's not a lecture. And I thought about what you could talk about. I think the polls are closing right now. Okay, we're not talking about that. So the debates which I've listened to, the Republican debates in particular, but also the last one or two in the Democrats, are quite remarkable. If you came from another galaxy, as Daniela comes from Austria, as an Austrian you're shocked, right, about this kind of discourse. I mean, the brutality of it, but also how articulate people are. So I take this to be really quite specific to Oxford and Cornell. So, two topics: critical realignment. What does that mean? And then, you know, is critical realignment ongoing or beginning? And that's a really serious question. When I was in graduate school, there was the most eminent professor of American politics, had made his name, Dean Burnham, had made his name on the theory of critical realignment. And it was basically an idea which said every so often, every 30, 40 years, American politics goes through a seismic change. This happened in 1896, an election about gold versus silver, which cemented the position of the Republican Party. It happened in 1932, FDR and the New Deal, breaking the hegemony of the Republican Party and institutionalizing Democratic hegemony. And then it happened in 1968-72. So when I was in graduate school, it was 1972. And Dean Burnham was sending out these memos, you know, every 4 or 5 days. Is this a critical realignment? What had happened in 1968 was in reaction to the civil rights legislation, the South was beginning to break away from the Democratic Party. The Democratic coalition under FDR was Northeast liberals and Southern racists. And that was a very explicit deal. Do not deal with segregation in the South. Lyndon Johnson came from Texas, and for reasons which you can read about in magnificent books which Carroll wrote, he decided that it was time for civil rights. He didn't decide that on his own. There was a civil rights movement. American society was changing. But he decided it was time. And when the civil rights legislation was passed by Congress, he predicted that the Democrats would lose the South. It was in a way saying he was something good for the country, but bad for Democrats. And this is how it turned out. So Burnham in 1972 said, well, is this 1896 or 1932? And he couldn't decide. And it turned out it was neither 1896 nor 1932. Because 1932 was preceded by 1928, when Al Smith, a Catholic, ran. Catholic couldn't become president, but he did remarkably well. So there was a critical realignment, which didn't happen just in one electoral cycle, it was an electoral cycle and a half. So Burnham was sort of saying, well, I'm not sure whether my theory is right or wrong in 1972, but I do know it started in 1968, and maybe it'll finish not in 72, but at a later date. And looking back, we can now see that the electoral realignment, the critical realignment, ended in 1980. It was Ronald Reagan's election. That created roughly three decades of Republican hegemony in the executive branch. Bill Clinton won 2 elections, but on the whole, it was Republicans. Right? So take this idea of a political system in which the fragments are floating, they congeal because of a political leader who sort of has figured out how to stick these pieces together, like FDR. And then over time, somehow they become unstuck. Society changes, there may be an exogenous shock, whatever. Now go to 2016. So what do we have in this electoral context? We have a mobilization of the left in the Democratic Party. If you had asked me, or anybody, 9 months ago, whether Bernie Sanders would have a chance of winning New Hampshire, we would have laughed and said, get yourself to a hospital, a mental hospital, okay? A democratic socialist in America, no way. And here he is, hoping Hillary, she's going to lose big today. She's not necessarily going to lose big in other primaries, but she's going to lose big today. Because he's from Vermont, you know, he's had a very extensive context there. They all eat Ben Jerry's, so it's so he's mobilizing a left, a class-based left, and a generational left. And that left wants to take the country back. Back from capitalism, from rapacious capitalism. Bernie Sanders basically gives one speech. Okay, it's what Wall Street believes. There's not much else which he's talking about. This is sort of like the mobilization of 2008. I want my country back, said the Democratic Party. And then it wasn't class, it was race and liberalism. The divide in the country was as deep then as it is now. Except that the liberals said, we've lost our country. Now the Republicans, the conservatives say, we've lost our country. But inside the Democratic Party, a surge then, and a different kind of surge now. While Hillary stands for the pragmatic, realist, liberal center. And that, with an electorate as angry as it is today, is not a winning hand race. She may still win, but it's not that the wind is in her back. She'll have to fight. So the 2016 Democratic electorate is young people, it is an emboldened left, and it is part of the old left. Bernie Sanders is what I would call my generation old left. 1960 civil rights, anti-Vietnam. So what about the 2016 mobilization on the right in the Republican Party? Clearly a desperation to find their country, to take their country back. And anybody who is a Democrat who resents that, all I'd ask them is, remember what it was like in 2008 for the Democrats. For the Republicans, it feels just the same way. That is, that's a reflection of the polarization in American politics. We don't longer think it's our country, it's the other's country. And those terms have really shifted in the last 15, 20 years. And so now on the right, this desperation, we want our country back, together with the anti-immigrant story. We don't like what this country is becoming. And of course, the conservatism, which is in part Christian conservatism, and it's part what I would call cultural conservatism. But there are many trends in society, think about the issue of gay marriage or so, which this Republican Party doesn't like. Young Republicans have more problems with gay rights or so. But the people running for office don't like it. So it comes then in various incarnations. There's Rubio, Youth in the American Dreamery. It's sort of the Obama campaign once more, right? From the right. He's very telegenic. His life story is an inspiring story. He is a very smart politician. And he surely, if he doesn't make it this time, he surely will become a candidate for the Republican Party to contest for president. In my personal view, no doubt about it. Whether it happens this time or not, who knows? But he's so young, he is so ambitious, and he's learning so much. And the first time around, you may have to learn a whole lot, right? Then there's Cruz, what I would call a mixture of righteousness and anger. Okay. It's the Tea Party and the Christian right, who has very consistently prepared for this campaign by breaking every norm in Washington. That was very deliberate. His view is that the rage in the country is so great that if he can mobilize the far right, it will bring in millions and millions and millions of new voters, and they will elect him president. Most other people say, no, he turns off too many independents in the middle who will vote against Cruz. But in this year, nobody knows. Okay. And then there's, of course, Donald Trump. And he is mobilizing inside the Republican Party, but he is mobilizing also, that's more important, around the Republican Party. That is, he will have, and he has, a significant portion of a Democratic electorate, which used to be called the Reagan Democrats. The people who voted in 1968, only in the South, for George Wallace, were Democrats. Many of them were white, many of them were like Appalachian whites, relatively poor. This part of the electorate has been floating for the last 30 or 40 years. In 2008, Hillary Clinton got that part of the Democratic vote in the primaries. Obama didn't appeal to it. They didn't like Obama. Well, they didn't like Obama for very obvious reasons, in part for reasons of race. So the anti-immigrant and racist slurs of Trump appeal to that part of the floating electorate. But it's not just erstwhile Democrats. It is also a floating electorate in the Republican Party, which feels it has been shafted. Not just for the last 8 years. It has been shafted by the Republicans for a generation. The tide which makes all boats rise didn't rise for them. And so this is the anger and frustration of having been had. And the Republican Party establishment has used this devil, which is now risking to sink the Republican vote. It has used it quite deliberately for 20 or 30 years. So Donald Trump is in the Republican Party, but he's also above both parties. Bernie Sanders is in the Democratic Party, he's not above. But there are people, and I heard this morning, somebody say, yeah, I haven't decided. 30 or 40% have not decided. So that's why I'm making prediction what's going to happen in your hands is rather risky. Yeah, I might vote for either for Bernie or for Donald. I'm not sure yet. That sort of reminds me of the Weimar Republic. Either the fascists or the communists, I can't remember which one, but certainly not the Democratic parties in the center. So that's the constellation. Is there a chance that Trump would run as a third-party candidate? It's possible, I doubt it. It's possible, I mean, he is, you know, it would take a lot for the Republican establishment to bring him to that decision. Is it possible that Bloomberg would run as an independent? It's possible, but I doubt that he would have a chance. Because Bloomberg is a technocrat, sort of a voice of reason, can stand Trump and can stand Bernie Sanders. This is not the electoral season for technocrats. It's white anger and hate. And technocrats don't do well with that kind of politics. So if you ask yourself how much of the electorate is located outside the center of American politics, take Bernie Sanders and take Donald Trump and take a certain portion of Cruz and a little bit of Rubio, and you come to a figure of around 2/3 of the electorate. That is an extraordinarily high percentage. Now, the electorate chooses according to the options. That is, as the election progresses, they will be recentered. There will be a smaller proportion of the electorate will be on the extremes. But it shows you how shallow the support for the center is, that people are making these choices. And they're making it because of their life experience. Everybody agrees, even the Republicans have come to think inequality is not a good thing. But every policy proposal the Republicans make is to increase inequality. And if you get a Republican president, it will be very interesting to see whether there will be any policy to undercut inequality. So the most likely thing, if it is a critical realignment, would be an exogenous shock. Something big and bad happening. Two things: the financial collapse. I know 1/3 of you want to work for Wall Street. Put your money into cash or Vermont real estate. Don't put it in the stock market. Okay, it's not a safe place to put money. Things are very jittery. And a big crash basically happens every 10 years. And the data we have from right on the road of that, the crashes get bigger. So 2008 was big, so what can be bigger? A run on the dollar. That would put us in the position in which lots of other countries have been. We haven't really experienced that. That would have an effect on the electoral meter. And the other one would be a major terrorist attack. By major, I mean order of magnitude bigger than 9/11. Don't talk 2,000 or 3,000 dead, talk 20 to 30,000. Would have a huge impact on American politics. So that's critical alignment. So who would assemble the new coalition? All I know, it will not be the Bush machine. It will not be the Clinton machine. It will not be the governors. That is, the people who've had executive experience, who are not doing well with it. If this were to happen in this electoral season, it would be from candidates who are stoking and representing anger and frustration. So I'm not predicting whether it's this electoral season or not. It might be like 1972. It might be, 2024. All I'm seeing is these economic, social, political, and psychological parts of it. Okay, let's go to foreign policy. It's a fundamentally secondary issue. This election is not about foreign policy, and it is about raw domestic anger. So what do the Republicans stand for? Militarization of foreign policy, which is roughly what the first Bush administration was about in 2000, 2004. Because they said, we are not a status quo power, we are a revisionist power. We will remake the order of the world. China said, no, 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 no. We are a status quo power. Europe said, we are a status quo power. Japan said, we are a status quo power. US was going to remake the world. We were revisionists. And then, we started 2 wars. They didn't end up too well. And then Bush in the second administration said, well, that wasn't so cool. We'll become more pragmatic and realistic. In that first Bush administration, forget about diplomacy, militarization of foreign policy. This is what the leading candidates are talking about. Okay? Carpet bombing, Senator Cruz. Preventive attack on North Korea, Jeb Bush. Rebuilding a military which has never been weaker, Rubio. it's still, you know, you add up all the military budgets of everybody else, we still outrank the top 9 or 10, and 6 to 7 of those are our allies. So, you know, but it stands for a program. The program that we must be strong, because being weak means that you'll win, and that doesn't sell with the American public, apparently. And the use of nuclear weapons, Donald Trump. No nuclear taboo for Donald Trump. So personally for me, of those 4, Trump makes me really nervous. Then of course, everybody rip up the Iran deal on day 1. Here's healthcare, there's Iran, one of 3,000 pages, one of 30 pages. I think they'll rip up Iran first. Healthcare take long. Okay, and unambiguous, unconditional support of Israel. But there is, and there was in the Republican Party, a genuine divide between the full-throated interventionism of Rubio and the realist caution or isolationism of Paul. Paul is no longer in the race. There was, for the first time in 40 years, a genuine debate. But Paul couldn't make it stick. Okay? So that's gone. And so what you have then hovering in the middle are people who lean towards militarization, but who know that the American public is not interventionist. So you look at public opinion polls, the candidates are way away from what the public wants. The public doesn't want to fight another war. So what about the Democrats? Well, basically there's nothing going on in the Democratic primary. Bernie only says Hillary was voting for the war in 2002. Well, that's a long time ago. I didn't. But he has no foreign policy planning experience or whatever. And Hillary on foreign policy is very strong. So he doesn't want to talk about foreign policy. And actually the lack of preparedness of that campaign in foreign policy is absolutely stunning. Would have taken no time for him to put together a panel of experts and do what everybody else does. He was not interested in that because he didn't think he would have a chance. Okay. Now he has to scramble. So not much of a Democrat. So what are the possible positions and potential alliances for a critical realignment to occur? The old left, shaped by Vietnam, don't intervene. This tends to be a democratic old left. Bernie Sanders. Okay. Basically, Sanders, from what he says, is old left, don't intervene. But it's not really articulated. The new left in the Democratic Party do intervene. It is a human rights interventionism of the 1990s and 2000s. Samantha Powers, you know, I think it's very much shaped by Rwanda, the greatest catastrophe of the Clinton's foreign policy. So that's the divide in the Democratic Party. Don't or do intervene. What about the old right? Intervene in the Republican Party. In defense of US values. If our values are besmirched any part of the world, and you don't intervene there, it may not affect what's happening in that part of the world, but it affects who we are and how we think about ourselves. To be honest to yourself and to be authentic, you've got to stand by your values and act out. Okay. So that's the old right. I'd say Rubio would be the most articulate proponent of that. And the new right says, don't intervene. We're declining power, we don't have enough resources, we just lost 2 wars, we can't extricate ourselves from them. Look at US interests. This would be a traditional European realpolitik formulation. So look at it, and Ron Paul would be the articulate for that. But you will find it in what many other of the candidates are talking about. So the Democrats are obscure. I think that their voters can be mobilized for all sorts of programs because the Democratic primary isn't generating a debate on foreign policy. Clinton is neither old nor new left. Clinton is an extension of Obama. she is a pragmatist, realist liberal. Sometimes she's a pragmatist, liberal realist. Sometimes she's a pragmatist, realist liberal. That depends on it, whether it's the realism more part or the liberalism. She's positioned herself to the right of Obama, but I think that's largely for strategic calculation, thinking she would run as a candidate for the Democratic Party. She doesn't want to have too great a distance between her position and the Republican opponent. And that's been quite clear, okay? And then for Bernie, well, there's nothing. The Republican discord. Carson claimed plainly unqualified, and I don't think he's likely to last very long in this campaign. The three governors. My hunch is, my intuition is that they're talking one way, but they would act differently. They would be sort of in the pragmatic, realist, liberal center, different from Clinton. They wouldn't push no Clinton-type agendas, but you'd still say they're part of the same universe. Trump, Cruz, and Rubio, unilateral interventionists. They are like the first Bush administration. So, but they're not taking account in their debate performance of the public's caution. And as president, if they become elected, they would have to take account of it. So from this, I deduce that foreign policy of incoherence and delegitimation is likely to make a critical realignment more plausible. It will not be a realignment where you get a neat repackaging of part of the Democratic Party going into bed with part of the Republican Party. It's not going to happen that way. But the incoherence of the spectrum of opinions articulated would not make foreign policy a resistant force against critical realignment. Okay, now for your debate, two views. Ongoing, you start history in 2004, the second Bush administration. First, there's very great continuity between Bush and Obama. It's captured within a realist liberal consensus with a different mix of unilateralism and multilateralism. Dramatically different from the first Bush term. But then you could say what's happening now is a continuation if you get one of these centrist candidates elected, but not if you get one of the three leading Republicans or Bernie Sanders. So for me personally, I think Rubio is still a question mark. I have the sense that he plays the Washington game and he wants to run against Washington, and therefore I'm not sure what he believes about foreign affairs. I know what he believes about Cuba, but he can't turn that on back. So if you look at say this is the beginning of a critical realignment, you would focus on the Bernie's, Trump's, and Cruz campaign, saying if two of these people get the presidential nomination of their parties, we will be in for rupture in something. So in some ways, where you come down on the discussion, ongoing or beginning, hangs on how you view the Obama the last 8 years, which is something I happily didn't want to talk about, because you're supposed to debate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Professor Katzenstein, would you mind taking a few questions?
It's 7:35. I'll do it from here and very briefly. You guys are all debate.
All right, sounds good. Are there any questions for Professor Katzenstein before we start our discussion? No? All right. Well, there's one. Yes.
This is a bit of a broad question, if I may. When we're talking about Bernie self-identifying as a democratic socialist, and he talks about foreign policy, usually the term, traditionally I suppose, the term socialist would have an implication for how they view foreign policy. But if you look at the difference, if you look at different iterations of socialists in different countries, Francois Hollande is a socialist, but he has deployed the French military to Mali and taken airstrikes strikes in Syria quite robustly. Jeremy Corbyn in the UK calls himself a socialist, and he is against interventionism point blank in almost all the instances. And Sanders seems to have some bit of differences, but they're not always clear. So I'm just wondering what the predictive value of calling yourself a socialist is now today with respect to foreign policy.
Well, I think the term socialism means different things in different countries. In Europe, in general, it means social democratic. So the difference between socialism and social democracy, socialism became social democracy sometime in the 1950s for much of Europe. And in Southern Europe, from the late 70s into the mid 80s. And once you're a social democrat, you're like a democratic republic. It's not a big deal. So Bernie Sanders, I think, is a socialist, democratic socialist in the American context, and has no foreign policy views, because America is very big. So I don't think that socialism now has a particular problem with looking at the world. It's just country specific.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Professor Katzenstein before we begin our discussion? Seeing none? Yes, please.
It's not supposed to be a lecture with questions. So you guys are supposed to, you want to be out of here by 8. Let's make this the last one.
Okay, at the end you talked about two views, whether it's ongoing or whether it's beginning. I didn't get the first part, the ongoing part.
So if it's ongoing, you have to somewhere, if it's ongoing, you have, like in 1972, he was saying, well, 68 started this, right? And I'm going to think, so you have to say, which slice of history do you want to cut into? I think the reasonable thing to cut into is 2004, the second Bush presidency, because that's really different from the first Bush presidency. And you ask yourself, well, 2004 to 2008, was that a critical realignment? Well, a lot of people who voted for Obama said, yes, everything is going to be really, really different. Guantanamo, you know, and we get out of Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Well, it turned out there were differences and there were a lot of continuities, right? Much more drone bombing, for example, under Obama than under Bush, right? So you'd say, okay, maybe there wasn't a great discontinuity. So we now have a continued story. And then you say, well, what does it mean for 2016?
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead and get started with our debate. The way it's going to work is we are going to go ahead and it's open for comments. So, you know, whether or not you agree, disagree, if you think that it's definitely, let's discuss this idea of whether it's ongoing, beginning, the critical realignment. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead and jot down some of your comments. That way, when we do a vote on what the body agrees or disagrees, you can always refer to it. So we'll write ongoing here, and then beginning here, and then any kind of general comments that are kind of, you know, in the middle, we'll just go ahead and jot them down here. So, that being said, we'll go ahead and start off the debate. If someone wants to go ahead and start us off and tell us about their opinion on it. Yes. And actually, if you can go ahead and say your name, that'd be great.
All right. Sorry, my voice is a bit hoarse. My name is Ichiro Kakutani. I would argue for the ongoing side. I think foreign policy critical realignment is an ongoing process because, like Professor Katzenstein pointed out, it's been a process. America has been swaying, has been trying to find its way between interventionism and non-interventionism since 2004. At 2004, President Bush promised that we're going to gradually pull out of Iraq, and then in 2008, Obama said we're going to, I promise, there was this big promise that we were going to leave Iraq. It turns out that, however, during Obama's presidency, that although we did pull out of Iraq, we went back in there almost instantly when ISIS started to come back with special forces raiding and coalition airstrikes, which are mostly consisted of American Air Force bombing Iraq. We are still intervening, although Obama said we're not intervening. As we can see, we're swaying between non-intervention and intervention for the last 10 years since 2004. And maybe a candidate this year or in 2020 or 2024 will cement that direction either to non-intervention or intervention, but it is an ongoing process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers? Yes, please. And once again, you can state your name.
Hi, I'm Andrew Kravitz. In my opinion, this is a I think a lot of it has to do with the Obama administration and the rhetoric used by Obama. A lot of the time, Obama will attack opponents of specific policies by making moral arguments. For example, with the whole gun control debate, whenever a mass shooting occurs, he'll basically base his entire policy prescription on the fact that people died in this instance. Therefore, if you disagree with me about how to control gun violence, then you are an immoral person. And I think this upsets a lot of people, especially on the right, a lot. And if you actually look at the political divide in America, that's worsened significantly during Obama's tenure. Even though Obama in 2008, he promised to kind of unite America, that was his, and bring both sides together, even though that was his campaign promise, I think his rhetoric has really done the exact opposite. And also, Obama often has a tendency to separate himself and cast a lot of Christian ideas and Christians as evil or bad. I think recently he made a remark that Christians should not get on their high horses for making comments about radical Islamic terrorism. And just comments like that, in my belief, I think that upsets a lot of people on the right and really divides America. And that's why I believe that, and I think that the left right now is kind of centered around the Obama administration and really driven by the Obama administration is really, and it's going to be either continued by Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, is really trying to, start a new era in American politics.
Thank you for sharing your opinion. Any responses to that? Or are there any different views to that? Yes, did I see a hand?
No.
Okay. Any other suggestions? Yes.
I'm Henry Kennegeiser, and I guess I would argue on the side of ongoing. Professor Katzenstein outlined, I guess, a little bit of the concept of critical realignment, and a lot of it had to do with the demographics of political parties in the United States and moments in time where these parties shifted, and a lot of the realignment had to do with groups within the parties fractionalizing, or I guess breaking apart and joining other parties and whatnot. And I guess since 2004, we've seen the immense growth of the Tea Party within the Republican Party, and they've grown to have a huge power over the party. They sort of outstayed John Boehner from his position as Speaker because he wasn't satisfying their needs, and that demonstrates a clear issue within their party. And I think that, especially this campaign year, with Senator Bernie Sanders having such a large pull from a part of the Democratic Party, but not the entirety of it, demonstrates some of that separation happening on the Democratic side. And I think that's something that really may begin this sort of critical realignment when both parties have internal division that's going to cause some sort of disagreement that may inevitably realign the whole thing.
Thank you very much, Henry. Responses to that? Other opinions on this? Or if there's a question that you would like to pose or present, please feel free to do that. Yes?
Yeah, well, I just have a question for you, Henry. Is it what you were just talking about, which was unique divides within each party, an indication that it's beginning? I mean, I don't necessarily disagree or that it's ongoing, but a lot of your rhetoric seemed to indicate that it was a new problem, and that it's beginning now.
Well, no, I was just saying that I guess for the Republican Party, they've had these internal divisions growing for a couple of years, I guess, with the Tea Party growing to such prominence. But I see Senator Sanders as sort of a moment for the Democratic Party specifically. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything's starting now. And I guess you could argue it for either side, depending on how you interpret the internal structure of the two parties. But I don't know, I guess I picked the ongoing side just because. But I see the point.
All right, thank you. Any other points or comments? Or if there's a different point that you'd like to address, please feel free to bring that up. It doesn't have to be particularly on these two questions, though. These are the ones that we're voting on in the end. Yes?
I'm Alex, and I believe that it's ongoing because if you look back at even starting in 2006, 2008, Virginia, North Carolina, they went from Virginia voted Republican from 1964 until 2004. In 2008, it went for Obama. Went for Obama again in 2012. The demographics there are changing. The demographics across the entire country are changing. I don't think that it's really starting now. I think it's just continuing because voters are realigning themselves and it hasn't started now.
Alex, if I can just ask a question on that. Do you think it's continuing since dating way back, to
I think
1960?
since 2006.
2006. Comments on that? Other opinions? I saw another hand around here. Yes?
Hi, I'm Abhijit. I would argue, I'm not so sure about the Republican side of it, but I would argue that on the Democratic side, it's really only beginning. Because of, if you go back a year from now, a lot of the Democratic Party is solidifying around Obama and the defense of Obama, a lot of Obama policy, you might think, or a continuation of that in the form of Hillary and all the ready for Hillary stickers you see around. But now we're seeing a sort of division of vision between Hillary and Bernie Sanders. And in that sense, you would hardly, like even, hardly anyone was saying that this was happening a year ago. I would say that it's really beginning on that side.
Yeah, definitely. It's taken a lot of people by surprise this election. Yes?
My name is Emmanuel, and I also think it's ongoing. If you look at the way the Tea Party has risen up, especially under Bachmann in the 2012 election, I don't think it's something that's necessarily starting right now, but it has been developing for a long time, especially with Obama's policies in his first term, when Obamacare got passed and everything. And in response to Evan, I don't necessarily think Obama's rhetoric is what's causing a further divide inside the country. I think Obama's rhetoric is a result of a Republican Congress not necessarily agreeing with him on everything. With his immigration plan that got blocked, and with a lot of gun control proposals, and a lot of Get More Bay and all these things. Well, I don't think Obama didn't come into the presidency with a rhetoric that was divisive. It was a result of a Republican Congress not really accepting a lot of the proposals he made. I don't think it's something that was inherent. No.
Thank you. Any responses to that, whether or not the administration and its rhetoric did kind of... Yes?
I'd say going off that, I mean, I'm not sure whether it's beginning or ongoing. I think we're seeing like a very dysfunctional government, not just executive, but legislative Congress. This Congress has passed some of like the least amount of bills of any Congress we've ever seen, and we're seeing a Congress where Paul Ryan says he's not going to pass any immigration bill that comes from Obama, not even knowing kind of what he's going to propose. Republicans denouncing Obama's executive action on gun control before they've even heard them. So I think on both sides, and kind of also since the crash in 2008, with this kind of increasing inequality that we've been seeing, and the government kind of seeming like it's not really doing anything and getting stuck on party lines. I think for me, that's where I kind of mark a beginning, and people just being dissatisfied and feeling like both parties aren't doing enough for them.
If I can ask you a question, do you think that this huge polarization is happening particularly at this point?
I mean, I think it happens in cycles, but I'd say we're seeing like a very deep polarization happening now, and kind of rifts in these parties. I just don't think that things as they are right now are sustainable.
Thank you. Responses to that? Yes?
I'd say that this is more of a beginning of a divisiveness, because in the past, if you look at the past 8 years, there's been a lot of substantial political movement. There's been the legalization of gay marriage through the Supreme Court. There's been the first legalization of marijuana in the U.S. states. There's been lots of foreign conflict with Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, all of those being prolonged. We've seen one of the largest healthcare, I guess, Obamacare being introduced. All of these are very major political contentious points, I guess, and I think that definitely contributes to new ideas and new resistance to the traditional, I guess, right and left. So I think that it is beginning, even if the roots, for instance, the Tea Party movement came several years ago. I think more and more you've been seeing this movement towards independent ideas, or ideas that involve less government intervention into the personal lives of American citizens. That's where like Rand Paul started to draw his support. I mean, you look at like the whole Oregon militia thing that like started up, like that was a very intriguing situation that arose in American politics. And I think
also with Bernie Sanders and like his growing support, you're really starting to see more of these groups developing and becoming created because there's been so much contentious activity abroad, domestically, all the gun violence, lots of intense events relative to the past several decades.
It's true. Thank you. Other points or comments? And if you've spoken already, you're more than welcome to speak again if you'd like. Yes, please.
I would have to agree with this beginning, especially on the left, like you said, especially with like the younger generations. Most young people, men and women, support Bernie Sanders over Hillary, which I think is like an important thing to note. That the left is moving further left, but also the fact that many young Republicans also aren't necessarily supporting the ideas of Ted Cruz and Rubio and Trump. So I would argue that there's going to be an alignment, maybe a realignment in the future with the Republican Party as our generation becomes more active in the